So folks, welcome to our webinar for May 2024. My name is Rob Whittle. I'm an aviation safety advisor from the Brisbane office. Now this webinar today is on airspace infringements, where we'll get air traffic control's perspective of what happens in these particular incidents. This information from the other side of the house, so to speak, will highlight that pilots need to be aware of their position at all times, where controlled or restricted airspace is, and ensure you don't have an airspace infringement. In saying that, we will also cover and have a short discussion on what happens to you when you actually do have an airspace infringement. Certainly, if you're in doubt of your position, contact air traffic control for early assistance to avoid potential conflicts with other aircraft and to prevent potential incidents from occurring. Now, as per previous webinars, this one will be recorded. We have turned off your microphones and cameras just to save on bandwidth, but please let us know if you want your camera and microphone on to ask any questions. Along with previous webinars, this one will be available on the CASA website under the Pilot Safety Hub Controlled Aerodromes and Operations section on the CASA YouTube and also on the CASA YouTube channel. Now, following the presentation, we will have a short Q&A time during which you'll be able to ask any questions you might have and have them answered. We also have some people online as well that if you wish to place a question into the chat, please do so and we'll attempt to answer them as we go along through the webinar. I will also be putting some links into our chat column there just to back up what is presented today and for future reading for all of you. Joining me today and presenting for us is our subject matter expert, Jackson Farrell from Airservices Australia. Jackson is highly experienced, as we'll soon hear, and I thank Jackson for his time and the expert knowledge that he passes on to us today. Welcome, Jackson.
Thanks, Rob.
Now, as per previous webinars, certainly those that have been on previous webinars, and for information for those that this is their first webinar that they've attended with us, you can get recognised with what's called an AvSafety Webinar Digital Badge. And these badges are made just to recognise your commitment to continuous learning for attending this particular webinar. And you can add this little badge to your email signature, digital resume, social media, and some of you may have seen these badges out on social media. To be eligible for these badges, you need to stay for the duration of the webinar. At the conclusion of the webinar, you will receive an email from Credly, our digital partner, and all you need to do is just follow the prompts in that email to claim your badge. Now, without further ado, I'll hand over to Jackson now and listen to the air traffic control side of airspace infringements. Over to you, Jackson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome everyone. It's really great to have you all join us today, and we genuinely hope that you will walk away having learned something new and hopefully with some insight into one of the key safety issues that our controllers manage on a daily basis, being airspace infringements. So as Rob alluded to, I'll be taking you through the presentation. Among some of our other team members on the line is Julian Stanford, our Senior Safety Liaison Specialist, and he'll be monitoring the chat to assist with any of your questions. Just a bit about me before I get started. My background, I completed my aviation studies and flew for Jetstar for 6 years on the 787 and also domestically on the A320. During COVID, I pursued a graduate diploma in meteorology with the Bureau of Met and then joined Airservices, where I completed the Diploma of Aviation in Air Traffic Control, and I've now moved into the corporate space in service assurance. Our purpose is to provide assurance that risk management processes are being correctly applied to meet related obligations and objectives, and one of the ways that we do that is the conduct of major occurrence investigations as well as assurance reviews, and one of which I'll touch on in this presentation as it relates to airspace infringements. So as per the title slide, our plan is to give you an insider's view on how we manage and prevent collisions and conflicts. In terms of an overview of this session, we'll do a refresher of airspace and what air traffic control does and doesn't provide in each. We'll do a deep dive on air conflicts by focusing on a specific type of safety occurrence reported by our controllers in airspace infringements, what they are and why they occur. We'll highlight the real world impact to our controllers with 2 case studies. We'll provide an overview of some recent trends and a specific safety review, and we'll talk about where you can find some more resources as well. We're also really keen to hear from you, and I plan to set some time aside at the end to open the floor to questions. So just before we get started, just recapping our airspace classifications, our inverted wedding cake structure that surrounds a lot of our capital city airports. Not shown here as special use airspace, which is quite relevant to airspace infringements as well. We do see from time to time those occurring with the likes of restricted airspace, for example, military restricted airspace, controlled firing areas, that type of thing. And then just going in terms of the requirements of entry and what ATC do and don't do in each of these areas. We know that in Class A, Class C, Class D and IFR aircraft in Class E, they're all subject to an air traffic control clearance, and continuous 2-way radio communication equipment is required in each. I guess Class C is the big one in terms of air traffic control provide a distinct separation service, IFR to IFR, IFR to VFR, and VFR from IFR. In Class D, it's just a separation service between IFR and IFR. And for VFR, we're providing traffic information. So it's more of a segregation service. So the typical airspace infringement scenario we see is Class D into C or Class G into C, and perhaps more seldomly Class G into D. And I guess a little bit harder to manage the ones into Class C because we're actually providing a separation service. So there are specific separation standards we have to apply. The typical one is 3 miles or 5 miles between aircraft, as opposed to in Class D where we're just segregating. So that means that we're putting something in place to make sure we're keeping aircraft apart, but not necessarily a specific separation standard. It may just be traffic information. So what is an airspace infringement and how do they cause conflicts? To start to unpack this, I thought we'd start with an excerpt from one of our safety promotions videos, which explains what an airspace infringement is and how they create a conflict.
An airspace infringement is the unauthorised entry into airspace that requires a clearance to enter, may be restricted or closed for the purposes of special flying activity or other reasons. If you're involved in an AI, there is the potential for your aircraft to operate in unsafe activity, such as where live weapons are being fired. An airspace infringement may also increase air traffic control or pilot workload and result in delays to other aircraft.
So that's just one of our videos created by our safety promotions team, and you can find this and others on our YouTube channel, as we'll refer further to at the end of the presentation. So as we saw, 2 main types of potential conflicts. So that's conflicts with restricted airspace and conflicts with other aircraft. Both types can have a startle effect initially on a controller, and while the majority don't, they do have the potential to increase workload for our controllers. So they're a distraction. They can divert attention away from the current focus. They increase communications with aircraft. They increase coordination between controllers. So if the infringement occurs on the boundary of jurisdiction between 2 sectors, controllers are required to coordinate so that both are aware of the impact to each of their operation. They can also interrupt the service provided to other aircraft that may require a rerouting or a diversion or vectoring away. So, for example, if there's an infringing aircraft that we can't get hold of or talk to, sometimes we might need to adjust the plan, and we adjust the plan by talking to a different aircraft to keep them away from the infringing aircraft. So in that way, we're interrupting the service provided to another aircraft to keep operations safe. I guess in the worst consequence, it can also have separation or safety consequences. So as I referred to earlier, in airspace types like Class C, where we provide an actual separation service with a standard, if we're unable to contact or do something to resolve the situation, we can have a breakdown of separation. So another way to think about this type of scenario is to think about the multiple controls and barriers that we have in place within our system, which is illustrated nicely in another one of our safety promotions videos.
Working effectively with ATC is one of the ways by which you can safeguard against hazards, as they have multiple protections in place to ensure your safety. Effective coordination between pilots and controllers strengthens these protections. Amongst other reasons, ATC may need to inform you that you or another aircraft nearby is en route. This can help you maintain situational awareness, sight traffic, and take avoiding actions if needed.
So zooming out to the bigger picture and the long-term trend in terms of what the data tells us about airspace infringements, and this is one of the functions we perform in service assurance in monitoring trends. What I'm showing here is 10 years of data, and this is the same data that we share with external agencies like CASA and the ATSB. It's interesting to see that airspace infringements started to increase before COVID, dropped quite a bit, then increased with traffic levels to a new high in 2023, and early data from 2024 suggests a continuation of that trend. So it was at this point in time that we did our first safety review, which we call an assurance review, to see what was going on with the increasing trend, to raise awareness and prompt action. So without going through all of the detail, I did want to highlight two key findings. And the first was that airspace infringements are concentrated around what we call a terminal control unit airspace. So that translates to the arrival and departures airspace surrounding our capital city aerodromes, with Brisbane reporting the most, followed by Sydney. And when you look at what we call the Brisbane Basin, there was a high number there too, and that can be explained by two key changes we made, which was the new runway at Sunshine Coast in June of 2020 and the new parallel runway at Brisbane as well. So I suspect that pilots may have taken a little while longer than anticipated to get up to speed on those changes. And you may have noticed there the different colours in the pie graph there. So the data is broken into different types of operations. So we can see that the majority involve visual flight rules. So typically general aviation, light aircraft, where aircraft are transponding, so controllers can see the aircraft on their surveillance and situational awareness displays. And that makes sense because controllers may have noticed these airspace infringements and reported that. And there's a tiny percent there of military and IFR airspace infringements, and also VFA aircraft who are not transponding. So that might be gliders or general aviation aircraft not equipped with a transponder. So we'd expect less reports there because other pilots would need to witness the airspace infringement or self-report. And it can also include airspace infringements that are detected by primary radar. So this is important because we want to highlight the role that technology plays, and we want to continue to encourage operators to fit their aircraft with transponders and make sure they're turning them on so that we can see them. The review also reinforced the idea that a high number of airspace infringements involve general aviation, including private operators or casual flyers, flying schools, student pilots, that type of thing. And so to us, that highlights the need for pilot education, awareness and safety promotion. So in terms of the human factor, as we referred to, what do we know about why general aviation pilots may have airspace infringements? So one might be a lack of situational awareness. So pilots may lose track of their position relative to controlled airspace due to distractions, high workload or inadequate flight planning. So as a countermeasure, we're suggesting enhance your situational awareness by using GPS and other navigational aids effectively. Regularly practice situational awareness techniques such as frequently checking and updating your position relative to control zones and using flight following services where they're available and subject to ATC workload as well. Communication issues is another one. So potential miscommunications or a failure to communicate in a timely fashion with ATC can lead to airspace infringements. So this could be due to misunderstanding an instruction or not keeping up with frequency changes or technical issues with communication equipment as well. So as a countermeasure, always ensure clear, concise and accurate communications with ATC. Pilots should confirm understanding of all ATC instructions and clarify any ambiguities as soon as possible. And regularly check in and maintain your communication equipment to ensure functionality. As a final one, I mentioned earlier, inadequate pre-flight planning and briefing. So sometimes we've found that insufficient route planning or a lack of awareness about the locations of all controlled airspace along the flight path can lead pilots inadvertently into restricted areas. So it's really important that thorough pre-flight planning takes place, including a detailed review of the intended flight path against current airspace restrictions and NOTAMs, and using flight planning tools and software to help visualise and avoid controlled or restricted areas as well. And technology is another one. So modern avionics such as moving map displays or ADS-B systems can help pilots monitor their position relative to controlled airspace in real time. Rob, did you have anything you wanted to touch on here?
Yeah, some really good points you make there, Jackson, too. Certainly the old saying goes, proper pre-flight planning prevents poor performance. And by keeping your situational awareness as you're flying around, as you've mentioned, EFBs, the advancements that we have in technology in that respect are always improving, and they're very, very good aids to visual navigation. And knowing where you currently are is of vital importance to try and prevent airspace infringements. So practicing other navigation techniques as well, not just solely and utterly relying on your EFB as a visual navigation aid to your navigation trip that you're doing, but using other nav aids that may be around that could provide assistance to fixing your location, even going back to the old school reading the paper chart and looking out the window as visual pilots. We're navigating by reference to the features that we see outside our window. So all of those all lumped in together, we know then exactly where we are and not causing a headache with air traffic control or any other airspace issues that we may inadvertently contribute to if we're not aware of our position and do have an AI.
Absolutely, all really good points as well. So once an airspace infringement does occur, how do we manage it? And I mean ATC, so there's usually still time to mitigate the consequences. So once we identify an airspace infringement, the controller will normally attempt to make contact with the aircraft. So that's made easier if we have more information on you. So ADS-B or IFR, even easier again if we already have details in the system about your routing, for example. We find occasionally, quite often the pilot might not respond, so they're either likely monitoring a different frequency or other situational awareness cockpit task managing may have gotten in the way there too. So the two key points to take away are can we see you and can we talk to you in terms of our ability to mitigate or resolve the situation? And we'll always try and readjust the plan and put a new separation or segregation plan in place with what we can control. So if we can't take action on an aircraft that's not responding, we might need to provide a control instruction to a different aircraft so that we're keeping everyone safe. I'm just quickly going to share this. So this is the Sydney VTC. It just speaks to some of the complexity around some of our Metro D or even our terminal control unit airspace. This is Sydney, but it's similarly complex in locations like Melbourne and Brisbane as well. You can see Bankstown is in the centre there. We've got Camden out to the bottom left. We've got Sydney Airport itself off to the right there. A lot of restricted areas in these, these dotted inbound routes into Bankstown, as well as some quite complicated control steps. So it just reinforces the importance of good situational awareness and track keeping as well. So I'd now like to move to the real world examples. This first one involves an airspace infringement that resulted in what we call an aircraft confliction. So that's two aircraft coming into close proximity where there's a threat to safety. So for context, as I said, Bankstown sits in the middle of quite complex airspace. It's a Metro D tower, so we provide traffic information between VFR and VFR, but are not responsible for separation. So pilots still see and avoid. There are some exceptions, as I said, when it's IFR, but we don't need to get into that, just knowing that it's, in this case, segregation and not separation. So this particular occurrence took place in June 2023. So the picture you're seeing on screen is similar to what controllers see on their screens at this type of tower, but controllers are mainly looking out the window. So this is called a TSAD display for situational awareness. Unlike other displays in other locations, controllers can't generally see the call signs of the aircraft. You can see the 3000 codes, that's the transponder code, and also the level is there too. So 015 translates to 1500 feet. So one of the local operators, for privacy reasons, we'll just call them Alpha Bravo Charlie, and you can see them with the ring around it, the red ring, a light aircraft at 1500 feet in both images. So Alpha Bravo Charlie entered the airspace without a clearance, so they thought they had a clearance. The pilot made an inbound call, however their position was uncertain, and the controller tried to clarify but got no response. At this time, Alpha Bravo Charlie was identified entering the airspace along with two other aircraft who had been cleared inbound. And there are a number of over transmissions leading up to this occurrence, which is quite common at Metro D locations. But in fact, Alpha Bravo Charlie was never actually issued a clearance to enter the airspace. And then upon review, it was found that that aircraft passed in close proximity to another, we'll call them Delta Echo Foxtrot, another light aircraft on downwind prior to the controller visually acquiring the two aircraft and resequencing them for a safe return landing. So these type of complex scenarios in Metro D aerodromes can escalate very quickly, so it reduces the time available for controllers and pilots to respond. So what might we do in response to these type of cases? We usually attempt to notify the operators of the occurrence. If they're known to us and we know their call sign and their details are in our system, that's where safety liaison can come in. And occasionally, as well as sending them the actual occurrence report, we might ask them to provide more information, like a pilot report, in the interest of shared learnings, I guess, and for their awareness and consideration, and even possible internal investigation if they wish.
Jackson, I'll just jump in there for a sec.
Yeah, sure.
It's good to hear, certainly, like how much the workload increases when an AI happens. There's obviously some instances too where you're trying to contact the aircraft that is having an airspace infringement, but you get no reply. That's sometimes the case, is it not?
It is the case, yeah. Occasionally, we find we may not necessarily get a reply. At a Metro D aerodrome, I guess it's good in that at least by the time they're on the ground, we'll be able to ascertain who they might be, and we might follow up with them, a phone call to the tower if we can. Again, it's an education piece. But I guess the key thing that we really want to emphasise is that the reporting or any follow-up isn't intended to be in any way punitive. It's about raising awareness, sharing learning so that the airspace is safer for all users, and ultimately we want to prevent reoccurrence. So on that note, we absolutely encourage feedback and self-reporting for all the same reasons. And as I said, occasionally we might try and get in touch if we can. And we'd encourage you all to do the same if you think you may have inadvertently had an airspace infringement as well.
Yeah, it's good to know, because I guess the fear in some people, I suppose, for want of a better word, of fear, is that if they don't, if they have the attitude that, hey, look, ATC are calling me, they don't know who I am, I'll just sneak back out of the airspace. That way I won't get in trouble. But it's good to know that if you do have one, it's nothing, the repercussions afterwards, it's an education process as to have a discussion with the air traffic controller and maybe discuss ways on how to prevent further ones, and discuss how this one actually occurred. So a good learning experience for the pilots involved.
Absolutely. Changing gear from Metro D, we're now going to look at an example in our radar Class C airspace. So this is an old Melbourne example. So you can see the arrival sequence here. They're the green dots coming down for runway 16. And out to the left here in the hourglass symbol is the infringing aircraft. So I'll just let the video play. So you can see here, controller's probably thinking, okay, can't get hold of the VFR aircraft. We still need to maintain separation between the arrival sequence. Here comes the stacker. So that's a system alert to alert the controller. We need to do something. Controller may not be able to get hold of the infringing VFR aircraft. So we're vectoring or taking the arriving aircraft that we can get hold of out of the sequence to preserve the safety margins, I guess. And then they'll probably be vectored up to the northeast and for a return landing once we can fit them back into the sequence. So it's just an example of how that might play out at a Class C capital city tower type situation.
Jackson, just got a good question actually that's in the chat, and probably a timely one to interrupt right now.
Yeah.
Is how long do you have to be in the wrong airspace, so to speak, before an airspace infringement is flagged? So if you're at, example given, at 3,000 feet and accidentally fly into the sea lower limit of 2,500 feet at 3,000 feet, you realise this, but then you quickly descend out of the controlled airspace after 60 seconds. Does that flag as an airspace infringement?
I mean, I guess in terms of the definition, if you enter controlled airspace without a clearance, it's immediately an airspace infringement. But I think the question is probably about in terms of the reporting aspect. It does rely on, I mean, we rely on our controllers picking up airspace infringement, so that's a situational awareness thing. Whether they notice or not, I guess perhaps if you're only in there for a second or two, they may not. Not that that shouldn't discourage you from self-reporting it though, because again, it's just in the interest of mutual learnings. But certainly around a capital city airport, if you're in controlled airspace for any period of time, particularly with a busy arrival sequence, it would be picked up. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so what do we do about it? So the whole system is aimed at supporting ATM safety. Airspace infringements are a key area. So we monitor where required. We might investigate or conduct other appropriate assurance activity. As I said, safety liaison and promotions are key. connecting point between us and you, the pilots, in response to these occurrences and trends, and they do a number of things in that space. So one of which is to produce safety promotion material. We have resources on our website, YouTube and LinkedIn, and I think Rob is going to talk more about that in a minute, but one page on our website I would like to bring your attention to is our airspace infringement interactive maps. So this was put together by one of our team who look at the data around airspace infringements, and it's a really useful page because you can see here you can move it around to an area on the map and select different airspaces, and it will show you where they've occurred, what direction, what level. So I'd encourage everyone to take a bit of a look at that in any spare time you have. And as I said earlier, we work really closely with CASA and their team within this space, and so I'll have Rob give you a bit more of a run through on this as well.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Jackson. Oh, if you could, just if we could pop back just to the previous slide. Sure. Folks, you've probably seen already that we do have some guidebooks on the website there. A couple of them are on this particular slide here, flying the Adelaide region and flying the Melbourne region. We do have flying the Brisbane region and Darwin region as well as Perth. And these books, especially the Brisbane region, and why I bring the Brisbane region up, it's not because I'm in Brisbane, but earlier on, Jackson, you showed a slide about the airspace infringements, and Brisbane was extremely high. In fact, on the slides there, it was number one, airspace infringements, hotspots for the Brisbane Basin area. So these guidebooks, folks, they'll give you some good information of how to enter and fly in those particular regions. And those books are also not just developed wholly and solely by CASA, but they are sent to Airservices as well for Airservices input and for local operators input as well. So it's a whole rounded approach that we have there to try and assist pilots that are unfamiliar in flying in those particular areas, giving them some information there to make it less daunting and to give them some good tips to fly in those regions as well. Thanks, Jackson. So just a reminder to everyone, like what protection does the airspace actually offer? So in the controlled airspace environment, it's primarily for RPT jet operations that are in there, but notwithstanding that, that's any aircraft that's in controlled airspace under ATC instruction that is flying in there. That airspace is there to protect the primary instrument approaches to the main runways. Also contains the holding patterns and missed approach pathways as well. The design also caters for degraded aircraft performance. So multi-engine aircraft, if they have one engine inoperative, obviously the climb is going to be shallower, so the airspace must conform and to keep that aircraft inside controlled airspace at their performance. Thanks, Jackson. So for summing up, and thank you very much for your attention throughout the webinar today, and I know there's a couple of questions in the chat that we'll certainly get to, but be aware of your pilot distractions, certainly in the cockpit. Think about your workload that you're under now. So all of these factors could unintentionally lead to an airspace infringement. There are services that air traffic control offer up. So we've got our flight following, but certainly if you are in doubt, speak up on the radio. Ask ATC. If you're unsure of your position, ask ATC on the appropriate frequency. Just remember, for those that are requesting a flight following, it's on a needs basis. So if the air traffic control can provide a service to you, they will, but if they're really busy, they may not be able to provide that service to you. ATC, once they identify you, obviously will follow the progress of your aircraft and afford you some separation. Make sure your transponder is on and squawking the appropriate code, whether it be in Class G airspace code 1200 or Class D 3000 or the discrete code that's assigned to you by ATC. Make sure you have that on. Be aware that if you are flying inside controlled airspace under airways clearance, if you're more than 1 nautical mile from your cleared track, speak up, let ATC know. Thanks, Jackson. So we ask you to do your part in trying to avoid airspace infringements, and that is be aware of your position, know where you are, know where the controlled airspace is. Hold an accurate altitude. Just remember there may be heavy jet traffic that's about 500 feet above you. Have your radio set to the appropriate frequency, the volume up, and is in working order. And as I said, with your transponder, make sure you are squawking the appropriate code at all times. That way, ATC can see you, and other aircraft with ADS-B will be able to see you as well. Thanks, Jackson. I think we're on to the last slide. So, folks, thank you very much again for joining us online. And a definitely big thank you to Jackson for the valuable presentation he has given us today. I trust that everybody has learned something new. Throughout the webinar as well, I have dropped some useful links into the chat for you, and I think Airservices Australia have dropped a few more into the chat as well. Now, we do have a couple of questions that have come through, and but while I'm hunting for those questions, does anyone have any questions that I'd like to ask now?
I could see a few questions have been answered by Julian, which is great. I can see one there about IFR and G approaching E. Will they automatically clear you? They may do, but if you're getting close to the E boundary and you haven't received a clearance, I'd suggest you request it.
A good reminder too is to leave yourself a lot of room. Give yourself time.
Any other questions?
There is one question, I've finally found it. What should you do if you realise you are in controlled airspace without a clearance? Do you just take your own action to leave the CTA, or speak up and call ATC?
I'd say if you're in controlled airspace without a clearance, probably the first priority would be getting out of controlled airspace, especially if it's critical around our terminal control unit airspace. But as Julian alluded to in the chat, ATC are always here to help, so a follow-up radio call or establishing communications would assist too.
Great, thank you for that. Look, if anyone would like to ask a question, you can always use the raise hand function as well, just on the top of your screen, just in the Teams link, in the Teams screen, I should say. There is one, can you tell me what AFIS, AFIS means in relation to IFR cancellation of SARWatch?
The Flight Information Service in relation to IFR cancellation of SARWatch. So they'll still be monitoring, but I guess ultimately you would be responsible for, I guess, reporting in the circuit or on the ground for the cancellation of the SARWatch. Another question there, IFR clearance into Class E. Yes, you do. We've got there how far before the boundary on an IFR flight plan approaching Class C from G and communicating. Oh, that's subject to control of workload, but certainly, as Rob alluded to, I'd be leaving decent margins. So if you're concerned that you're expecting a clearance and haven't received one, you might want to give the controller a nudge, but it's subject to workload. I might just tell you another question. What happens if you enter CTA without a clearance and you can't raise ATC? If you realise you're in CTA and you don't have a clearance, I would say, and certainly if you can't establish communications, I'd say probably the first priority would be leaving CTA. I would do everything you can to try and get on the right frequency to raise them. There's the guard frequency as well, potentially for a relay. But yeah, just if the first priority would be leaving CTA if you can't establish communications.
we'll take another question. I'm just
So,
mindful of a bit of time, actually. So,
yeah, what if you're close to an infringement spot but don't enter the controlled airspace? Controllers trying to contact for intentions and don't respond due to the wrong frequency. What's the safety protocol? I guess this just comes back to, we'll do everything we can to get in touch with the aircraft that we might be concerned about if we're aware they're about to have an infringement. But if you don't respond or we can't get hold of you, then we'll probably shift gear to providing instructions to aircraft we can control so as to maintain. If it was Metro D, it'd be segregation, traffic information, something like that. If it's C, then we'd be doing whatever we can to preserve a separation standard. So in the terminal airspace, that would be 3 miles. En route airspace, normally 5 miles, unless it's procedural or some other separation standard we're using.
look, we'll just take one more question.
Sure.
I think just being mindful of time, and thanks for everyone's patience and still being online, which is fantastic. It's in the chat. Says, what is the tolerance level? I.e., there are many Class C steps at 2,500 feet, which can be VFR route altitude. Does accidentally hitting 2,600 feet temporarily due to weather, updrafts or so forth, or incorrect barrow setting from departure aerodrome trigger an airspace infringement?
It's a good question. So I guess where you can, if you can leave buffers between the steps and your cruising altitude, that's the gold standard, I guess, to mitigate against that type of scenario. There are tolerances applied to the transponding altitude. It's normally in the order of 200 feet, it depends, but I guess technically, if you're at 2,600 feet and the C step is 2,500, and you know you are, then it's an infringement. As to whether it would be reported, it's probably controller discretion. There are the tolerances we alluded to. Did it have a safety consequence in terms of, was there a jet overflying at 3,000 feet, that type of thing? I guess the bigger message there is, if you can provide buffers, that's a good thing.
Unfortunately, we will have to wrap it up there. Don't forget to check your emails for the one from Credley and log on to the site to receive your badge. Thank you very much for attending this webinar, and goodbye for now.
Thanks, everyone.